Hi everyone. Today I want to do a video and talk to you a little bit about switching propane providers or companies when the company owns the tanks that you're using. I thought this video might be helpful to go over some suggestions that might make the process a little easier, and also just to open your eyes to some situations you may not be aware of that I think are really important for your best interest. So let's start out. First and foremost, most important thing in my opinion is get your hands on your lease agreement or tank rental or supply agreement. This is going to be a document that you signed. Typically it's like those papers where you sign one and it copies through a couple copies. So they generally give you a carbon copy. Might be pink or yellow, could be white. It's generally got a good bit of information in it. You want to find that. Now, if you don't have it, reach out to your supplier and ask if they can provide it to you. This is fairly common. It happens a good bit in the industry, and it is something that, they should have no problem doing for you. Excuse me. The reason I say that this is so important is that highlighted in these documents, there's going to be different paragraphs for different situations to cover different topics. But in there's going to be information about termination of service, about picking up equipment, about restocking equipment, manpower, manual labor, all sorts of things like that. And they'll even go into further details as far as like rental fees and usage requirements and late payment charges. There's a ton of info in there, and they're really great to just kind of understand. So you want to get that, you want to read through that, you want to understand it. If there's not something you don't understand, reach out to your propane supplier and ask for clarification. What does this mean exactly? Now, if you don't get your hands on it and your propane company doesn't have it, chances are that either the company lost it or it never existed in the first place. So let me give you some examples of how this could happen. In the past, propane companies were smaller, mom and pop kind of organizations, businesses, and there were not always these written agreements like we have today. So nowadays, you'll most likely sign some sort of agreement if you're using a company's equipment. But in the past, that may not have necessarily been the case. Maybe you've had these same tanks at your house for 40 years. And in that time period, maybe the company was bought out and sold and, liquidated into other companies so many times that this document went missing. Another very likely outcome or possibility is that you moved into your property, the tanks were existing, they were already there, and at some point you should have signed some sort of agreement to use the equipment, but for some reason, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. So you have no agreement. When it comes down to those types of situations, not too much can be expected of you. If you were never explained, the costs affiliated with termination of service, or you were never provided that, and there's no proof that you don't have it, you have no knowledge of it, they don't have it, you have some negotiating power with a termination of service. If you do have it, read through it and see what the amounts are for the different services. Also, very important, see if there is a blanket statement that encompasses changes to this agreement over the years. If there is not a statement like that, then what you signed is what you agreed to. And those should be the rates, unless the rates are better now. Typically, agreements that were made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are a lot more affordable as far as termination charges than the agreements that are being written today. So these are just things you want to be aware of. You want to be conscious of what is expected of you, what is required of you legally, and so you know that you're being charged the appropriate price for you and what you had agreed to. So that is my first recommendation. Get your hands on that agreement. My second recommendation to you is understand that the best time of year for a swapping of companies when you are using their tanks is off-peak season. That's typically summer. Now, depending on your type of use, maybe it isn't summer, but it is typically summer. And for the propane company, off-peak is most likely going to be summer. There are multiple reasons for this. One reason is avoiding having unsightly tanks sitting in your yard in excess for months. Another reason is that most likely the tanks that are moved away that you were using will have some propane in them, propane that you purchased. Plus, you're going to be getting your new tanks, and they're going to have propane in them. So there's also a financial aspect of money being tied up. And until these tanks can be recovered by the company, that money is just kind of there in limbo, right? There's also a decreased rate of a run-out possibility if you switch off-peak. Your usage is lower. It allows for a little more time to get tanks installed or tank installed and to get it filled up. Depending on the type of tank you have installed and what your usage is, you could use more than what they are initially setting the tank with. Due to regulations and just logistics, some tanks that can be installed full are just practically physically impossible to get installed full. And you don't want to run out if you don't have to, especially in winter. So best time is off peak. Also, while you're dealing with all this, these tanks being picked up, don't expect an exact date from a provider. You may want a date. You may want to know, when are these tanks going to get out of my yard? They've been here for 6 months. But typically, propane companies don't necessarily schedule a pickup unless they need to do some sort of pump out or things are a little more involved. Generally, they'll just kind of work them into routes if time allows, if there's extra manpower. Now, if you run into the case scenario where the company needs the tanks, then they may come get them quicker. But the current customers and the new customers, the oncoming customers, are going to have priority over you. Unfortunately, I know that is not exactly a fun pill to swallow, but you're a customer that isn't going to be a customer anymore. So service probably isn't a top priority. And then a final reason why I believe off-peak season is the best time to pick up tanks and switch out service is because of the ground. So some people are very sensitive about their yards and how they look. And when the ground is wetter, these trucks, these tank carts, just maneuvering of these tanks is more likely to tear up your yard. And that isn't necessarily due to the neglect of the operator. It's just a fact that there are times a year where the ground is wetter and softer than other times a year. So that is why I would recommend that you switch off peak season. Now, I know there may be a financial aspect to this. The reason you're switching companies is probably due to a service issue or a pricing issue. I do have a video that addresses pricing with propane companies when they own the tank, and I would recommend that you take a listen to that to see if there's any pointers or suggestions that might, improve things. Maybe the relationship could be salvaged. Maybe it can't. But anyhow, you can certainly swap tanks in the winter. It's just, there's some more aspects to it that make it a little more challenging, and expect those tanks to hang around a while, the original tanks. Now, nowadays, unfortunately, when you terminate service with a propane company, you can expect an array of charges, and there are various terms for these charges. I'm going to name a few. You could see something different. I mean, companies come up with their own names. You could see something similar, but I'll just kind of run through these for you. And this is why it is so important that you understand your supplier agreement and your rental agreement or lease agreement, because that is where these things should be listed, and very important. But let me just go through these. So nowadays, if you are recent to a newer company, you weren't with a mom and pop, you haven't been with the same company for decades, these are very common, and you can easily expect some fees with picking up equipment and switching companies. So a termination fee. Some companies, their agreements have kind of evolved over the years. So some companies maybe never had a termination fee. Some maybe had like 3 years and then there's no termination, or 5 years and then there was no termination fee. And some companies always have a termination fee. But these are things that can change on lease agreements from year to year, decade to decade, ownership to ownership. So a termination fee, an early termination fee. So say, generally, this is in conjunction with a reduced service. So say you had your tanks installed and the company ran some propane line and they supplied a regulator, a second stage regulator that, became your property, and whatever, made some connections in the house. They did some labor, supplied some products that were at a cost to them, but they didn't charge you for it. But they said, there was no charge for these things. The installation was free, unless you decided to terminate before so-and-so date, and then you had to pay for these costs. So that's something also. A pickup fee. This is pretty common. A pickup fee is just picking up the tank. It's not necessarily a termination fee. That can be something different, but a pickup fee can just be collecting of the tank. It can be a separate fee. So even though you may not have a termination fee, you could still have a pickup fee. There is also something called a pump out fee. So certain tanks legally cannot be transported with more than a certain amount of propane in them, and they would legally need to be pumped out at your location before they can be transported. Now this is a little bit of a dangerous thing. It's not ideal. Companies don't like to do it. Requires extra manpower and equipment, and you can expect to pay a pump out fee generally if that has to happen. Another fee that I've seen is a restocking fee. When they bring back, you know, maybe you have a tank they were able to transport with, I don't know, it has, I don't know, 40% in it, 35%. And at times they will charge you a restocking fee to restock that. I don't know, you know. Sometimes these fees, it can seem like they're just getting you any way they can. So that's why I really encourage you to know what you are supposed to be charged, what you agreed to. If there was any sort of blanket statement about increasing in these fees, and also make sure whenever you're planning this switching of companies, you're discontinuing your service with the provider that you have, you get someone's name, very important, get their name, take really good notes, ask for prices of, you know, what this is going to cost, what this is going to cost, you know, what is the cost going to be. Now, some things are going to be kind of estimated. If a pump out is required, well, it's going to depend how much is in there. It's going to depend how many hours it takes. Do you know what I'm saying? When you're reimbursed for what propane is in there, you know, that's going to offset things too. So they're not going to be able to give you like, this is the exact dollar amount, most likely. But just understand the charges you're going to be charged. And then that way, if the bill comes at the end or the check comes at the end, however it ends up working out, you can go through the itemized invoice and you can verify that the charges are as were discussed and fair and legitimate. So I hope this helps you in your quest to switch propane companies. I believe that's it. So check out my other propane videos and have a great day.